In this video, we're going to talk about sharing your faith with other people. Hey, my name's Jacob from Servants Not Professionals, and in this video, we're going to take a look at how to share your faith easily with anyone wherever you are. And we'll do that through taking a look at Greg Koukl's book, Tactics. In this video, we're specifically going to look at his coined term, the Columbo tactic. So let's jump right into it. First things first, what is the Columbo tactic? The Columbo tactic is based off of a character from a detective show known as Lieutenant Frank Columbo. And he was a detective in this show based off of his name, Columbo. Now he's known for the phrase, just one more thing. See, there was this scene where the screenwriters needed to add more time to it, and so they just kept adding on, just one more thing. And so during an interrogation, Frank continually went back into the room and said, just one more thing. And Greg Koukl uses this as a method for effectively sharing your faith without getting you all nervous. And importantly, without a need for the other person to feel offended. Because as Greg says in the book, if anyone in the conversation gets mad, you lose. Now I've mentioned this book Tactics a lot so far, but what is Tactics? Well, Tactics is a game plan for sharing your faith. There are many tactics in this book, many that he talks about, but in this video we're going to look at the number one tactic, which is the Columbo tactic. The Columbo tactic gives you the ability to share your faith confidently and without offense. So let's jump right into it. In the chapter number 4 called Columbo Step 1, let's look at some of the quotes and explore what Greg Koukl puts forth as an effective method to share our faith. You ready? Let's jump right in. Step 1 is gathering information, and we do this by asking questions. He says this, whenever you get stuck in a conversation, you can always turn to a question to get things moving again. See, we as Christians, we often want to assert or give what we believe to be true. We want to tell people, but he offers a different method for sharing our faith. And that method is simply asking questions to lead someone to a logical conclusion. Because Christianity is a logical conclusion. And so he puts this strategy forth. He says, the most important question you can ask is, what do you mean by that? See, I have plenty of experience sharing my faith with people online, and I get plenty of accusations back. See, when you're commenting online, you're anonymous, which means if you say ridiculous things, nobody knows who you are, and no one can hold you to that reputation. So I've had plenty of ridiculous things thrown my way, both at me and at God. Trust me, stories I can't share online. See, Koukl says most people came to believe what they believe not through careful argument, but through some sort of personal encounter. And that's definitely true. Many atheists that I've interacted with are hurt by the church and therefore equate that to being hurt by God. And so they don't want to be Christians. They don't want to have a relationship with God, even if he was real. So we shouldn't always assume that our arguing needs to be head knowledge, but instead a heart issue. And so Koukl says you should become a student of other people's beliefs. Ask questions, be genuinely interested in people, and you'll start to understand where those heart problems come into play. Step number 2 of the Columbo tactic is called reversing the burden of proof. Basically what this means is Christians always have the responsibility of proving what they think to be true. And other people who interact with Christians, they don't often have to do the same. And so what we do by asking questions is reversing that burden of proof. Instead of saying, I need to prove everything that I believe no matter what, saying, well, you have an accusation against me, or what I believe. Can you prove that's true? So Koukl says if someone offers a story that sounds like a fairy tale, let them defend it. Some cultural stories today might be Jesus marrying Mary Magdalene. Well, we as Christians don't have to prove that didn't happen because where's the proof it did happen? We reverse the burden of proof by asking, how did you come to that conclusion? And the answer, by the way, is going to be, well, I read a pop culture book about it. See, as Christians, we often think we have to assert our beliefs on other people, but by asking questions, we can kind of weed out some poorly held beliefs that other people have as well. See, if they're the ones telling the story, if we ask them a question and they start telling it to us, then they're the ones who must defend it. So a great follow-up question is, how did you come to that conclusion? And so Greg Koukl, he gives us this advice. He says, you should immediately switch from persuasion mode to fact-finding mode. Not opinion-finding mode, but fact-finding mode. See, we don't often have to persuade people that something is true. Actually, what we can be doing is showing them that they do not have facts to back up what they believe. Guess what? If you ever get into a situation where you feel up over your head, all you have to say is, thanks, that's helpful. Let me think about it. See, if you're not asserting things that you believe, if you're just listening, then when someone starts to press you, all you have to say is, that was helpful. I just got to think about it. Now, sometimes using the Columbo method will make you feel like you're up over your head. And so he gives us in this next chapter 2 reliable rescues. 2 ways to get out of a sticky situation. He says this: when someone asks for your opinion, you can often respond with a question instead. For example, if someone asks you, what are your thoughts on abortion? Well, as a Christian, you could say, well, I believe it's murdering a baby and there's sanctity of life, but see, that's just starting up an argument. What instead you can respond with is, well, I'm a follower of Jesus, who was an ancient Israelite, and he followed the Old Testament law, so what do you think Jesus would say in that situation? And Kokol then says, sometimes you can leverage someone else's statements to make a case for you. This is true both in support of yourself and to show someone their beliefs are not factually sound. In the case that I just mentioned, you could simply say, well, I'm a follower of Jesus, what do you think he would believe? And when they respond, well, he probably was against it, then they're already supporting your claim. You're not just believing this because you hate people who have abortions. You're believing this because you're a follower of Jesus, and Jesus didn't believe in that. And he closes out this chapter saying this: in effect, he was helping me make my case. See, sometimes people will say contradictory things, and when you point out that contradiction, well, they have to choose one of those sides. And when they do that, the other one is left unsupported. And in effect, they're helping you to build their case, or build your case against this point. That transitions us into step 3, which is using questions to make a point. So we can use questions to draw out those contradictions and to show someone maybe they're holding on to beliefs that they really shouldn't be. Kokol says the goal is to test whether the walls of their views are strong enough to stand. Are their supporting pillars really that strong? And that's a powerful tactic. But sometimes someone just won't let you get through. And the reality is we don't have to give them everything all at once, but giving a little conversation, the way that Kokol describes it, is putting a little pebble in their shoe. See, that's our goal. And if that's all that we can do, that's great. And if they won't let us get through to them, have more of a conversation, then Kokol says this: sometimes the best thing to do is to let the encounter naturally die. But that's our strategy for sharing our faith with other people, is simply asking questions, putting a little pebble in their shoe to give them something to think about. But it's not just something done in the moment. See, our next chapter here is perfecting Columbo. How do you get better at this tactic? Kokol says you should practice beforehand so you're ready when the moment comes. One way that I highly recommend to practice is just using ChatGPT. You have a constantly captive audience 24/7 that you can interact with all the time. And importantly, you can make stupid mistakes. And no one gets hurt and equates that with God hurting them. See, Kokol reminds us the goal is not to embarrass the other person, but to help them think. See, this could be used for evil. If you know what you're talking about, you know the goal you want them to get to, you can very easily manipulate them to get over there. But our goal is not to do that. Our goal is not to embarrass someone or call their beliefs stupid. Our goal is to simply put a little stone in their shoe for them to think about. And if you practice, next time you'll be ready. But see, this tactic is also usually used against Christians. And so our final chapter here, Turnabout, shows us how to defend against Columbo. See, because the reality is, Christians as a whole have not been taught to just raise an eyebrow and say, oh, what do you mean by that? We hear questions doubting our faith, we get scared, we don't want to answer. We think, oh, those objections are so rock solid, when often they're not. We need to learn to raise an eyebrow and say, what do you mean by that? Why is that a problem? For example, you say you're a Christian and someone says, well, you know, evolution has been proven, right? And you say, oh, what do you mean by that? And they say, well, if everything came from Luca, the last universal common ancestor, then there's no need for a God. But you as a Christian need to learn to just raise your eyebrow and say, really? Are you sure that rules out the need for a God? Is that our only reason for believing in God? What do you mean? And when you know how to ask the right questions, which by the way is just, what do you mean by that? You gain a lot of power in the conversation. Because people often haven't had to think past the initial objection. Okay, so what? Evolution's true? Okay, there's plenty of Christians who believe in evolution. So why aren't they atheists now? So Kokol says, whenever you get into a tough spot, always ask questions. And our final point of help, he says this: if you feel like someone's trying to manipulate you, just pause and ask a question instead. Kokol's tactic, the Columbo method, is an extremely powerful and underused tactic for sharing our faith. Our goal is to just put a little pebble in someone's shoe to get them to think about the ideas that they have held wrongly for false reasoning. And when we follow this, we can feel bold about sharing our faith because we have much more power in the conversation than we realize when we simply ask questions. But let me know in the comments down below what stood out to you most, and we'll see you next time.